I would just love to start with a little bit about how you got interested in video work. Was there kind of like a catalyst moment for young Annabelle that like you felt this kind of calling to go into film, or what did you even really see it as? Was it a film pursuit, or was it more of like a video mass media pursuit?
Yeah, I think I don't even know what started my interest necessarily. Like, if you look at any home video of me, like, I was always just reaching for the camera.
Yeah.
Like, my parents always joke about that. And so I was always interested. And I feel like what gave me the idea that I could do it as a career was honestly, I just, like, my friends and I used to make silly YouTube videos all the time. When I was just, like, at a friend's house and we were making a video. And their mom was like, oh, so is this something you want to do, like, when you grow up? And I was like, oh, so something I can do when I grow up? And, like, just that question, like, got me started thinking about, like, oh, yeah, like, I could do that. And then, I don't know. I thought maybe probably I would go into more of, like, the movie route at one point. I think everyone who's interested in film probably looks at that. Yeah. But, like, as I got older, video became so... I feel like I also grew up in a time where video became, like, huge as I was, like, going towards that. Whereas, like, you can do video in so many different avenues. Yeah. Where I was, like, never really worried about, oh, like, if I never make it in Hollywood or whatever, then, like, is this a waste of time? I was like, well, there's video in everything, so I feel like it'll always be somewhat relevant. So this is interesting because I think you kind of came into it right on the heels of like my generation of film school students. So, but I have a very similar kind of origin story in that like I was getting really into the idea of film and into the idea, like I was watching a whole bunch of behind the scenes of movies and stuff and really loving the theory of it. And I remember sitting in pottery class in high school and talking about this with the kids around the table. And I made some comment about like, oh man, it'd be so cool to be a director, but I, can never do that. And one kid looked across the table at me and went, why not? And like, that was like the moment I decided to go to film school. Cause it's like, yeah, why not? Why not me? Sort of thing. So just that someone kind of speaking it into your life and into existence, I relate to that a lot. But when I came into film school, it was 2007, so it was right on the cusp of like DSLRs getting high def video and the 5D and all that type of stuff. So by the time you got in, because what year did you go to college? I started college in 2015.
2015. Okay. Yeah. So it had about, 8 years or so there of development. And you're right. So many different like career avenues opened up and different ways to do video. So what was like the moment where you decided I'm going to go to film school for this? And like you said, maybe a little bit of Hollywood, but like what other possible career paths did you see for yourself at that time?
Well, my mother was like kind of always like, you can't do this as a career kind of a person. And so I feel like I always had a little bit of that fallback mindset. And so I actually went to school and I went to the University of Minnesota and they let you do a create your own major as an option. So I did like video production studies, but then I also had that communications creative writing background. So I'm like, if for some reason video doesn't work out, I can go into something similar, more in like the marketing realm of things or writing.
And there's bleed over there, of course, but yeah, interesting. Okay. So was there a moment then in college or like a series of things that like solidified, yeah, this is the direction I want to go?
I don't know. I think I just actually like right out of college, I was like applying for all these jobs and the first job offer I got was not video. And it was like a pretty enticing salary and like benefit package and like it was like but it was also like one of the first offers I got. And I was like, I really wrestled with that because I was like, oh, this like feels like it should be the thing I do. Yeah. But then I think when I was thinking about it, I was like, but I really do want to do video. Like, even though I did have that fallback and I was like, oh, I could do one of these other things.
Was it like a writing job that you were getting offered or like, was it still adjant to what you had been going to college for?
It was more of like a marketing type of thing, and more like print media. But yeah, so I think when I was like looking at that, I was like, wow, this is like a really enticing job offer. But then when I thought about it at the end of the day, I was like, that's not what I want to be doing. And so I think that was maybe the final like nail in the coffin. That I was like, yeah, I really should be doing video, because I think I would regret it if I don't.
Yeah. So how'd you get started then in the actual industry? What was kind of those early days like for you?
So I did a lot of like freelancing projects, just like editing or filming wherever I could find work. I had a couple like part-time gigs through a couple different avenues, and then that led me to Captivate Media, because I did want, especially in my early days where I'm like, I didn't want to be like a business owner. I was I don't want to be finding the work. I just want to do the work.
Yeah.
And so when I had the opportunity to do video full time, where I didn't have to worry about where it was coming from, that was like really enticing to me, where I can just focus on like practicing the craft and like being creative.
Yeah. How long were you kind of freelancing before you kind of found your first production studio job?
Let's see, like 3 or 4 years, I want to say. But I always was taking like jobs here and there, even throughout like high school and college.
Yeah.
So I guess like longer than that, but like full-time freelancing, like 3 years.
Yeah. And I relate to that for sure. And, you know, the odd wedding here and there, you know, so-and-so's parents' friend has a store that, you know, they want a promo video for or something. And especially for you being kind of one step past my generation of things, like, social media marketing was not a thing when I was growing up. Right. And so you were probably experiencing a little bit, make us a video for Facebook, make us a video for Instagram, those sorts of things. How do you think that did that like shape the type of videos you wanted to make? Like, do you find yourself gravitating towards social media style work versus like maybe longer format, etc.?
That's a good question. I feel like I do. A lot of my background is kind of in that social media montage, quick paced type of like editing and filming. So I do feel like I sometimes fall into that a little bit, but that also means that whenever I have the opportunity to do something that's like different or slower or more long form, I feel like it's enticing because I don't get to do it as much. Right. And I like the variety personally. So I like being able to do like both of those styles or any different thing. Right.
Yeah. Well, and so then our connection is interesting because when you started at the production company that I used to work at, I think I was still director of production at that time. So I was kind of leading the video team. So interviewed you and did a couple of those along with other team members and was super excited when you joined the team. And I think one of those things that we saw was that like high energy editing and all that stuff, which probably meant that that's what we called on you for a lot. And you're like, hey, let me do some other things too. But we didn't have that at the time. We didn't have someone who could bring that energy. So, you know, my journey through that company is its own story, and we overlapped for a few years there. But I'm curious, just because how long have you been with the production company?
Over 3 years.
Over 3 years now. So, and you've grown in that capacity.
A lot.
Yeah, well, personally, but also title-wise, like because you're lead cinematographer now for the team. Yeah, which is awesome. And I mean, you were hope you don't mind my saying, you were the greenest person we had on the team when you first came on. Yeah. So that's a huge career growth
for sure
in the span of 3 years. So can you just and I mean, was that through COVID too? Or
a little bit.
It was tail end of COVID.
Yeah, I started in like 2021, so it wasn't like the peak of COVID, but there was still like
because I remember we interviewed in person.
Yeah.
So we were past some of the lockdown stuff.
Yeah.
Okay. So just tell me a little bit about like the last 3+ years and what that growth has looked like for you. How have you kind of like seen yourself take on new challenges? Yeah, all of it.
Yeah, for sure. I think one of the benefits of the company that we like both worked at is just how quick paced it is. And so it's like you're almost like forced to grow because you're just like doing it so much. And it's very small scale. Like there's oftentimes you're the only person going out on production. And so it's like when you can't rely on somebody else, like you kind of have to just learn how to like pivot and like be creative and do it on your own, which I think pushed me to like grow in ways that I didn't expect when I first started, for sure. And just I think too, just being able to like there was a lot of various different types of projects we got to take on in the past couple years, which also helped me grow like creatively.
Yeah.
I think
because you work primarily with school districts, but then also nonprofits.
Yep.
What are like maybe some of the standout things? And I know we'll talk about the documentary here in a little bit, but like what are some of the standout things or like projects where you're like, oh yeah, that really stretched me? Was it like a particular type of client or a particular type of look you were going for, shoot style, etc.? And I guess it's probably good to clarify that you shoot and edit.
Yes,
Yeah.
I do both. Yep. Yeah, I think I've always felt very strong in my editing capabilities, but I think maybe when I started with this production company, I was probably, I think my like cinematography has grown probably even more because I was like less comfortable with that in the beginning. And like I said, just like having to go out on like 3 or 4 filmings a week for various different clients and different like projects, and having to like do all that pivoting. I'm trying to think if there's like a specific.
You get your 10,000 hours in quick.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know. I think there's a client we work with, the Minnesota Rural Education Association. And those tend to be, it's in rural Minnesota, so you have to travel for it. So you're like driving a long distance, usually like at least over an hour away from the Twin
Sometimes
Cities.
3-4 hours.
Yep.
Like Minnesota's a big state.
Yeah, going all over. You're by yourself, and that client is somebody who knows exactly what they want, and they're very particular about it. And so I think that was maybe one project that really stretched me, where it's like you've got the long drive, you're by yourself, you're trying to pivot, you're trying to please this client who's there with you, like, and they're very particular, not in a bad way, but it's just like sometimes we work with clients, they're like, yeah, do whatever you want, we trust you, and sometimes they're like, no, we have like the specific vision.
That's such an underrated thing that I think people just starting careers working with clients don't realize, especially in like media, is you've got 2 styles. I mean, there's nuance, but generally 2 styles of clients: those who either don't know what they want or they're just open to you doing whatever, and those who do. And both of them have pros and cons, right? Like I think a lot of people may immediately go, oh, I want to work with the clients who just let me do whatever. But then that's a lot of work to come up with all the concept, and it's kind of all on your shoulders. And I also find sometimes that even though a client will say, oh, we're not sure what we want, just do whatever, like there is something in their head. And if you don't get that, then, oh, that's not really what we were hoping for.
Yeah, sometimes you get to the editing room.
Yeah.
And well, this isn't it. And it's like, well, you didn't tell me
well,
what
you didn't tell me what to do. Yeah. And then on the flip side, I think people will look and go, oh, a picky client or a client with a lot of ideas. Like, sure, there are times when maybe they're trying to drive creative and you'd rather have a voice, but on the whole, I usually found those to be much smoother because they're kind of acting like their own producer in those moments. And unless, you're bringing on your own producer, if you're solo, it's helpful to have that. But you're right. The pressure to get it right is for sure there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so, I think those definitely pushed me in a way of like being on my A game. But yeah, actually, like over the 3 years I was with this production company, we've grown significantly.
Yeah.
And I think one thing I noticed was, when it was just kind of like 2 primary cinematographer editors, it's easy to like match style and everything kind of looks similar.
Yeah.
But then when you grow that to like 3, 4, 5 different editors, cinematographers, like I started to notice, I was like, man, our videos do not look the same anymore.
Yeah, interesting.
And like, there's nothing necessarily bad about that, but I think that was one area that, why I got the leadership role is because I was really trying hard to like, coach people and like be a leader of like, we are still a company that needs to like fit under a brand. Yeah. And like you can deviate from that, here and there. But I think as a whole, we needed to like recenter around like, what is our brand? What do we want our look to be? Yeah. And how do we do that smoothly across all these.
If we're going to keep making similar types of videos, what does that lighting style look like? What's our framing like? How are you gathering B-roll? Because there's a million different ways to shoot all this stuff. You can go super handheld documentary style. You can go really smooth tripod, mix of everything. Drone gets mixed in there. Like there's a lot of things to keep in mind when you're doing work at volume.
Yeah.
how have you balanced, this is a bit of an inside baseball question because I've worked with you, and so I know that we've had this conversation, but how have you balanced the need to do things at scale and volume and the fact that clients are coming saying, hey, we've seen these types of videos, can you make one of these for us, with that desire to keep growing and changing and pushing yourself and not just do the same thing over and over again?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think it varies. I think I'm able to recognize when something just needs to get done. And then when a project comes up that maybe has a more flexible deadline, or that client who's like, I'm not exactly sure what I want, I always just like take advantage of those opportunities. And I'm like, all right, well, I have a little bit more time, so I'm going to try something new, or I'm going to like pitch this idea. And I think that is something that is nice about the work we do, is like there is that flexibility of like, you always have, like your videos that you're just going to kind of use the same formula, and you're going to like, make money off that. Right. And like, that's what kind of keeps the
and the advantage is you can turn them out quick, which is good for you. It's also good for some clients. Some clients need, their highest priority is speed. Yeah. And it's like, great. If that's what you want, then we have a template.
For sure.
But if you can give us a little more time, then we can come up with something unique.
Yeah. And we've had a variety of both of those types of projects.
Yeah. I like the idea of like picking your moments, right? Because and this is true in any job, because there's just, no matter how cool or fun your job is, like there's going to be repetition. And, you could be someone who's like Jimmy Chin shooting on the side of mountains. And it's like, you know what? There's probably a lot of tedious hours prepping the climbing gear and just doing the same thing over and over again to make sure he doesn't fall to his death, sort of thing. But then finding those moments of like, okay, inside the monotony of a job, where can I had an old mentor who always called it the 80-20 rule, which was every time when we would do wedding videos, but every time we'd go out to do another wedding, he'd be like, do 80% of it the exact same way we did last time. Play with 20%. Take 20% to play with a different type of shot or something, but like you can't go into a job completely experimenting in all areas. Right. Because then you're not going to be able to deliver what you said you were going to deliver. So yeah. 80-20 rule is one way I've looked at it, but the kind of sniper picking your moments is a cool
And I think
approach.
My boredom a little bit kind of feeds into my creativity sometimes in
explain that.
A weird way, where like when if I'm at, let's say, like 3 different schools throughout the week, and I'm getting like the same footage of like, all right, medium shot of a student coloring a piece of paper, I feel like by the 4th time I'm like, I gotta switch it up because I'm getting bored. And like I'm like, then that's when I'm like, well, what if I, switch this angle, or what if I do this instead? Yep. And like, I feel like I'm always, every filming I'm on, I'll like just end up getting bored to like force me to like try something new.
Right. How does gear factor into that? Like, are you sometimes packing like a different lens or something just to give yourself more creative options?
I think sometimes, yeah. But I don't know. I think there's a lot you can do with like what you have. I don't know.
So what's your normal kit look like in terms of going out for one of these shoots?
Well, with the type of work we do, it's very fly on the wall, where you're like going into an environment and it's not like that environment is there set up for you to film. You're just trying to capture what's going on. Yeah. And so I'm a big proponent of having like the like most reach zoom I can get, because I think that's where you get the most authentic stuff, is when I can be further away and I can have like zoom in 100 millimeters and like get that close up from across the room where I'm not up in their face, where they don't even notice me. Yeah. So I feel like that's usually my go-to, is kind of trying to be like as not noticed as possible to capture that like authentic moment.
Yeah. That I like that. And there's multiple ways to approach authentic looking footage in my mind. And I've seen some people want to put a 10 millimeter lens on and get right in close, and the authenticity is I'm here in the moment with you. But then they're in the moment, they're changing the moment of what's happening. So your approach of like, I'm not going to disturb, it's almost like wildlife photography where you're like, I'm going to stay out of your way. I'm not going to, spook you, and we're going to capture what's actually happening. And I like that. Do you find yourself bouncing between those at all, or are you pretty much like the kind of the I'm going to stay in my corner and not hide, but like kind of take my shots?
It depends on the type of environment. I also like, I do think there is some moments too where I almost like want to be involved, where like you know, like let's say I'm in this class of high schoolers and there's like this group of girls who are giggling because they're like, this is really awkward that there's a camera here.
Yeah.
And then like I'll kind of like maybe get up in their face a little more and then like that makes them laugh, and then like you capture that moment where like you use it in a video and it's like, oh, these kids love school, they're having a good time, but really they were just feeling uncomfortable.
Yeah.
But you can't necessarily tell the difference sometimes in some of those moments.
Right. Yeah, no, those when do we insert ourselves as documentary style filmmakers, and when do we try to stay out of the moment?
Mm-hmm.
That's a skill, right? Like I don't have that fully down, and I think that you learn that over time for sure. And you'd learn it in different environments. Like a school environment is going to be different from, you know, going and shooting video with houseless people or whatnot. Like it's a completely different kind of vibe of what they're expecting and, you know, what you're expecting to get and all those things. So one of the projects that you've finished up recently is a 60-minute documentary for St. Paul Public Schools. And I think 60 minutes probably crosses the threshold of being considered a feature length. I think maybe for docs, a lot of times they consider 45 to be features. So you've completed your first feature, which is pretty cool.
Yeah, very cool.
and it's funny because when you do work at volume, I've had this conversation with a couple of folks at the company you work for and elsewhere. When you do work at volume, there's moments where you step back and go, how many feature films have I shot this year? You know what I mean? Like I've done, 100 5-minute videos. Like that's a lot of footage. So very cool to see it actually compiled into a feature length. So can you tell me a little bit about just when that comes down the horn of like, we're going to do a docu-series that's going to turn into, a 60-minute piece. What was your approach like? What changed in terms of how you wanted to approach this? Can you talk a little bit just about like your leadership role on the piece and kind of how you initially approached going after this large project?
Yeah. I was really excited when we got the opportunity to do this because kind of like what I said before is like, I felt like it was a period of time where I was doing a lot of the same thing. And this was like, ooh, something shiny, new, and different.
Yeah.
I was the lead cinematographer editor. So I was on pretty much every single filming except for maybe like 2. We had like a meeting ahead of time of like, what do we want our style to look like? And we tried to match that as close as possible throughout the experience. But there was also like a lot of learning curves and bumps, obviously, through the production process, just like, because all of us working on this hadn't really done something to this magnitude before. And so like with your first time doing a feature, there's obviously going to be some things that you have to learn.
What are some of the things that took you by surprise in terms of, you're in and out of school buildings all the time filming? What was different about this one?
I think one of the main hiccups was the file management and file sizes.
Interesting.
Of like, we usually film 1080p for most of our projects. And then most of these projects, you're filming maybe like at most 8 hours of footage, let's say.
Yeah.
And then you edit that into like a 3-minute video. But this was like 4K footage.
And you're shooting on Sony's, so like
Yes.
FX6, FX3.
Yes.
But you would normally do 1080p even on 4K cameras.
Yeah.
Okay.
Right. Just because our like 90% of our videos get viewed on an iPhone.
Yeah.
And we have, like it's just easier for our file management to keep the sizes small. And with S-Log, you can do a lot even in just 1080p.
For sure. Yeah.
But yeah, so this was like 4K footage. It's like hours upon hours. It was like we followed like this school district for an entire school year, filming at various, we weren't filming every single day, but like a lot of different events. And then trying to, like our computers didn't really work. We ended up having to like rent a different computer because our computers couldn't handle like when Premiere got above like 30 minutes, it just would crash every like 2 minutes. And we're like, this is not working.
Yeah.
We have deadlines we got to meet. Just so different things like that, that we weren't expecting. But I think, and we had microphones that didn't work too, that we had to like return. We actually didn't end up returning them till after this project, but like, so that was kind of a hassle, having some audio issues.
Was that like stuff you caught on the day of, or stuff that you got back into the edit room and realized there were issues?
Thankfully it was like things we would catch in the moment and like make adjustments, but it slows you down when you have to keep like interrupting the interview to like adjust the microphones and stuff and try to troubleshoot why the signal's not working. And, so there's some of that, but thankfully there's lots of technology nowadays that can clean up audio pretty amazingly.
That's true. Yeah. No, you can save a lot of stuff that you couldn't save 10 years ago.
Yeah,
so
for sure.
That's great. Yeah. So you filmed over the course of a school year. And I know like, so the video is 60 minutes, but it's originally broken into 4 different parts that released as individual episodes and then compiled. So were you editing as you go throughout, or did you have to? Wish. Oh, really? So you filmed and then had this whole year pile of footage to edit.
Yep. Whoa. Which was another thing that I'm like, if we do this again, we can't. Right. We should do this differently.
Were you doing any prep along the way? Were you keywording footage, things like that?
There is a little bit, just because of like. We didn't really get to a place where we had time to do like keywording or starting to sort through interviews, but we what I would do is like go in and make a transcript and like kind of like read over that or browse over it to prep for like the next interview, because some of these people we interviewed multiple times, and so that was like one at least like prep thing we did, was like looking back, it's like, what did we talk about, what do we want to expand on any of this, or like what do we not need to go over again, things like that. Which was like, so I guess there was like a little bit of like watching the footage back, but like not as much as I would have liked. I think
the lion's share of editing happened after everything was in the can.
Yeah.
Okay. So how do you tackle that? Because that's a lot of interviews. It's a lot of B-roll.
Yeah. I mean, I think it helped that I was like on all of the interviews and I was like a part of the planning process and what questions are we asking. So like I had an idea of like what we wanted and what we had already talked about, and then just going through and like keyword, because we had 2 editors on the project. So I just tried to set it up in a way where I like keyworded, not just like for my own benefit of being like, okay, somebody else who wasn't on these interviews is also going to need to know what all this means. And so I went through and did the bulk of like the going through interviews, pulling out sound bites and placing them into what episode we would want them in. And then I did 2 of the episodes and another editor did 2 of the episodes.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, and it's when you think about a docuseries, I think traditionally you're seeing those episodes release kind of over time, but you kind of dropped them all at once. So it is kind of a different situation in that you couldn't, okay, we're done with this. We got all our footage for this episode. Now let's edit it and move on to the next. You were probably gathering certain things at the end of the school year you were using in episode 1 or whatnot.
Exactly.
So, okay.
Yeah. And there was like, I think the idea of breaking it up into episodes was more of like making it digestible. We wanted to reach as wide of an audience as possible, because it's mostly just about like raising awareness. And so like, that was more so it's like, if somebody, sees like, oh, a 10-minute episode, I have time for that, versus like, I don't know if I want to sit down and watch an hour length thing. And then hopefully after that first episode, they get sucked in where they
start binge watching.
Watch the next one.
Exactly. So what are maybe a couple of the things, now that you're on the other side of it, what are some things that you're like really pleased with? Maybe they were things you shot for and hit perfectly. Maybe they were accidents. And then what are maybe a couple things that you would do differently again? So like the good and the bad out of it.
Yeah. Ooh. I mean, I'm really proud of all of it. I think like I'm such a perfectionist, so I can be really hard when I like review my work. But I think this was one that I definitely looked back on and like was like, wow, I can't believe I did that. Because it was like, it's the biggest project I've ever worked on in my whole career. And I think like, even despite some of these like technical issues that I was talking about and like feeling pressed for time towards the end, like, I think that it's still like, I'm amazed I'm like, I think about all the things that went wrong and I'm like, man, this should be a lot worse.
And the beauty of it is that 99% of people watching will have no idea.
Exactly.
Like you'll know, maybe another cinematographer will be able to go like, oh, that audio sounds a little different than that one, whatever. No one's gonna know or care, and that's the thing about like 99% of our projects is like we're so over hyperly critical of our own work, and I think that's good. Like it drives us to do better, but I think it does good for the soul to play it in a room full of people and to get a positive reaction and realize that like that little bit of color correction that you wish you had more time to mess with didn't change the story. It didn't hurt the story in one way or the other.
And I think that's one of the things that makes it like I just think that the story is so important and like getting that message out, which it doesn't even like it almost makes like some of those technical issues or things doesn't even matter because it's like this is such an important message that needs to be shared. It could have been shot on an iPhone and it would still be as impactful.
I saw a documentary this last summer at a film festival. It was specifically around trauma and body positivity, and really, really amazing piece. Great story. There were all these shots in it that were like out of focus, and like you could tell it was being shot with a DSLR and the autofocus was hunting and all these things, and it like did not matter. Like they held on these shots long enough to like it was out of focus for 5 seconds and then finally creeped in, and it didn't matter because you're still watching the tears come down people's faces and you're like, I don't care. Like this is so powerful. I'm so glad you didn't cut. And that's like an maybe more extreme example of like content over style, content over technical or whatnot. And you can always buy new mics or you can always, work on your technical skills later, but the story being there and being told is like the most important thing.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. So what are like your hopes now going forward in terms of getting another crack at a project like this or something new you want to try? Like, is there something on the horizon that either is coming or you want to come that you're like, I'd really like to do this?
Yeah, I think I feel like docu-style is kind of like a buzzword right now. We're already getting some other like clients who are like, oh, we want a docu-style or we want a docu-series. And it's like, even if it's like maybe going to be like a 10-minute thing, just using that word has kind of brought us new business. But I kind of like, I think to me, part of what's interesting about docu-style is almost the imperfection of it. Of like, you're not trying to make this thing that's super technically sound and very cinematic. It's more of like, it can have, you can have a camera bump in there as long as you're like hitting the moment and hitting that storyline, which I think is kind of exciting in a way of like, it kind of puts a little less pressure on you a little bit, where it's like, oh, let's just like have the freedom to like tell these stories we want to tell and not worry as much about every single technical thing going correct.
I love that. And that's really interesting because there is an art to shooting docu-style. And like you can get really good at snap zooms and, focus hunting and all this stuff and handheld. But at the same time, all of that technical ability is mirroring imperfection, right? It's all just kind of adding a veneer to what already exists in that, like sometimes you just turn on the camera and go. And then also like, because I think a lot of the work that you do would probably fall under the label of like corporate style, right? With the schools and everything. So infusing a little more documentary style into that, taking some of the sheen of corporate work off, doesn't have to always be perfectly lit and perfectly this and that, and helping it feel more authentic. Like I can see how that would be very exciting. Yeah,
for sure. Yeah. And I think, that's almost like a trend right now of like,
very much.
I feel like commercials have turned into just like somebody talking to their phone, and it's even like maybe has the vertical framing.
Yeah.
And it's got jump cuts, and that's just what people are used to seeing right now with like TikTok and YouTube and how like people consume content. And so, leaning into that in the cinematography world too.
I remember sending a client a video a few years ago with jump cuts and some imperfections in it, and specifically because we were trying to do like it's kind of like a YouTube style thing. They were not having it. They're like, this is completely unprofessional. This isn't how editing is done. All these things. I'm like, let it marinate a little longer. In 5 years, this is going to be real normal to see.
Yeah.
So, awesome.
Sure.
So I always like to ask this question of, when you look at your career, there's typically the classic question is, what would you tell your younger self? And I'll ask you that, but I also want to flip that and say, what advice would you give for your younger self? But then also, if you could sit with somebody who's 10 years ahead of you and who has kind of gone a similar career path, but is, in the next 10 years, like, what would you ask them? Like, what do you want to know about in the crystal ball about what's coming? So I guess I'll start with with where you're at now, having grown in this production company to a lead cinematographer, just completed your first feature-length documentary. If you could go back to 2015, Annabelle starting high school or college, and what would you tell her?
Yeah, I think honestly, probably the advice I would give would be that like there isn't just one path to video. I think kind of we were talking about this a little earlier of like felt like even though like YouTube was pretty big and social media video was becoming more popular, I feel like there still was like a little bit of a mindset of like, oh, it's like you either go into like do like feature length Hollywood type of video or like you give up. And so I think maybe even though I did find that path on my own, I think just that reassurance of like, like you can do this and there's not just one path. Like there's so much of that in between of video and it's just going to keep increasing. Yeah. So what would you ask someone, 10, 15 years ahead of you as you look at your career path? Man. Putting you on the spot. I know. I feel like I would have I have so many questions for so many people. Man, I don't know. I feel like maybe what is like a risk you wish you took when you were younger in your career?
Yeah, I'm marinating on that because it's a risky business in general for a lot of people. It's not a lot of folks have jobs with production houses.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of freelancers out there. For sure. And there's a lot of gig workers out there who, even if you're in a union, you're waiting for that production to start so that you can get work or whatnot. And so, there's inherent risk, but then also what is risky to do? Is it, striking out and doing something on your own? Is it, trying a specific type of project? All those things. That's really fascinating. Is there a risk that you want to take?
Ooh. Oh, man.
Maybe you're asking that because you've deep down got one you're looking for validation for.
I don't know. I think there's some things that I'm probably too risky with and some things that I'm definitely could lean off the branch a little more. I know I've crashed a couple drones, but sometimes it's worth it. Sometimes it's worth it for the shot. I don't know.
It can be, yeah.
I think I told my manager once said that he's okay. He's like, sometimes it's worth it to like get the good shot, and then like a week later, I was like, well, I tried it for the shot and I crashed the drone. So I don't know. There's some things where it's like, yeah, maybe don't take that risk,
right?
But I don't know. That's a good question. I think I'll be thinking about that.
Well, keep yourself open to risk. Yeah. I love that. Cool. Well, hey, thanks for chatting. Thanks for telling us your story. I think you've got a really cool story. I think you've got a little bit of a story of like what is the new normal in terms of this post YouTube, post TikTok world of like videos everywhere, and there are still career paths to be had in Hollywood, and and I say that generally, that means New York and Atlanta and everywhere as well, but so many of us are kind of making it happen in different ways, whether that's with a production company or freelance or indie productions. I'm always reminded that like film and video is like 100 years old.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like it's a very young art medium. Photography is older than that, sure, but like what we do as filmmakers, the merging of music and sound design and cinematography and all this stuff. This is the youngest art form that exists, really. And so, in a way, we're all pioneers of this, that the aliens, 20,000 years from now will look at and go, okay, here's how they kind of found their way. And so you're finding your way. I'm finding my way. And I would imagine that there's probably a lot of people out there who have a similar story to yours of, wasn't maybe necessarily sure where the career path was going to go, but keeping eyes open, keeping open to risk. And you never know.
Yeah. And I feel like with any career, it's like an important piece is like collaboration and like finding those people. Cause like, I feel like sometimes, especially in video, like you said, and being a freelancer and working for yourself, you can get into like a silo, but like, I feel like it's really hard to grow if you're not like reaching out to people and being like, oh, how would you set up this framing for this interview? Or like, what if we tried this? And like having, giving that back and forth and like collaborating, I think is just like so important.
And working for a production company, there's a little bit of that built in, where you have coworkers, you have other cinematographers and editors working alongside you. I would imagine, though, even there, sometimes it's good to step out and go, hey, let's talk to somebody we're not talking to every day and come up with a brand new idea. And yes, 100% for those people who are trying to make it on their own, whether that's a conscious choice to build their own business or they're just freelancing trying to find the right opportunity, like networking for the sake of just building community, I think is super important. I think networking can be a really yucky word. I know for me at least, where you're always like, okay, I'm trying to sell to this person or whatnot, like get them to hire me. But it's like, and that, that's valid. Like everybody needs work. But if you can go into those coffee conversations or whatever it is with the spirit of like, I just want to build community, I think you'll get something out of it, regardless of what the next step outcome is. And B, you're probably more likely to get hired that way anyway, just because you're a chill guy or girl. Like, it doesn't have to be always, okay, let's find the next job sort of thing.
For sure.
So that's a good reminder for me right now, because I'm in a bit of a silo situation and I have to remind myself to get out and actually be brave enough sometimes to ask, hey, what do you think of this? Like, what could I have done better? Or whatnot.
Yeah.